Today, I want to talk about one of the most beautiful pieces of music that has ever been composed by anyone. And if that sounds a bit too grand and a bit too implausible, we could narrow it down to the most beautiful violin concerto that has ever been written. And there have been many. We've got the great Beethoven, we've got the sublime Sibelius, we've got the amazing Tchaikovsky, the wonderful Mendelssohn, Walton, Stravinsky, Bartok. I mean, there's so many great violin concertos. But this one has been recorded more and has sold more copies, I believe, than any other violin concerto ever. So if more violinists and if more record labels are choosing to record this, it must be for a reason. And the reason, I believe, is it's wonderful to play for both the conductor, orchestra and violin. It's exciting, it's passionate, it's beautiful, it's romantic, it's got colours, everything from the word go right through to the end. So in live performances, it's the one piece where you never look at your watch. You're just sucked through this torrent of emotion. Now, obviously, many people watching will know this piece. And I've known this piece all my life. There has never been a moment in my life when I haven't been aware of this piece for as long as I can remember. For example, and I think I've mentioned it before, my father bought me a wind-up gramophone when I was very young, probably about 3 years old. And we used to go to second-hand shops, junk shops we called them, and we used to buy up all the 78 records because they were very cheap, you know, the hard shellac records. And I had a recording of this played by Yehudi Menuhin, later to become Sir Yehudi. And he recorded it, I think, in 1937 when he was still a teenager. And the sound of that recording coming through the big horn on this wind-up gramophone is something that is still with me today. This piece of music, I've shared all my life's emotions with this piece. I'm going to bring you 5 or 6 really great recordings of this piece in the next few minutes. But before that, of course, as always, a little bit of context. Who is Max Bruch? And what do we know about him? Well, in many ways, you can say Max Bruch is a one-hit wonder because he wrote 3 violin concertos. This one, number 1, is the only one that's ever had any measure of success. And when you hear the other 2, you understand exactly why. He did write a number of choral works, of course, and he also wrote the very, very beautiful Kol Nidrei. It's a piece of music for cello and orchestra, and it's also arranged for cello and piano. It's a marvellous piece. You should check it out if you have the time. But let's get back to Max Bruch. Max Bruch was born, should we say, in the heart of the Romantic period. When Beethoven dies, around, I think, 1827, you've got Max Bruch being born in 1836 in Cologne, which was then a part of Prussia. Germany hadn't yet been formed. But by 1836 and 1846, as Bruch is growing up, Beethoven has given way to Brahms, Johannes Brahms. Brahms is the big composer of the day, the guy who's struggling to sound and be as great as Beethoven. And that is the shadow. So Bruch is growing up in the shadow of Brahms. And the Romantic period, which was sort of established earlier by Beethoven and then Schubert, of course, and as we know it, is very well established. Now, Bruch was born into a family. His mother was a singer. His father was an attorney at law, a quite wealthy, I understand, and he later became the chief of police in Cologne. So Bruch has grown up in this family. He briefly learnt philosophy or studied philosophy in Berlin, and that was a bit of an alternative society at the time. It still is today, many would say. But I don't think he really settled, because he became a teacher of composing, and he travelled from one academy to another, but I don't see any long periods of study. So there's a lot of information that's missing in my research, and I apologise for that. Maybe some of you can share some more light on the topic in the comments. That's basically what I know about Max Bruch. I can tell you about his death later on. He died rather poor after the First World War. Things didn't go that well, but that's another story for another day. Let's talk about the piece itself. It's written in 1866, that we know, and a very famous violinist at the time called Joseph Joachim worked on the piece. Now, Joachim was a good friend of Brahms and a famous violinist, and so it was important for Bruch to try and get a good violinist to perform it, because then you'll get a bigger audience, and if it's a great performance, then people may love it. And it's, as I say, it's his first. So Joseph Joachim worked on the score at that time and suggested some rewrites and changes, which happened in 1867, and in January of 1868, the very first Joachim performance took place at that point in time. And then gradually its reputation grew and grew and grew. So we have three movements: the Voorspiel, which is like the introduction, which is a sort of an allegro moderato, and then we've got an Adagio, a slow movement in E flat, which drops to E flat from the G minor to E flat, and then we've got a finale in G major. So we've got a very nice progression in the chordal structure as well, key structure as well. But let's start talking about the piece itself. It's just wonderful. As I say, if you've never heard it before, you are in for a really, really big treat. You know, just after I finished babbling on about it and then playing all these different versions, you know, grab yourself a coffee, glass of wine, lock the door, switch the phones off, really take the time to listen to it without any interruptions from beginning right into the end. And if it doesn't take you on this roller coaster, if you're not crying, if you're not full of emotions, all different emotions, and fire and love and passion, if those things don't come through with this piece of music, I don't know which piece of music will have that effect for you. Anyway, enough of this. Let's get on. As always, in the chapters, you can click through to where you want to find your way through. Okay, so I've got a number of violinists for you, and I'm going to start off with Maxime Vengerov. And Vengerov, a great violinist. He's being the conductor is Kurt Masseur, and it's with the Gewandhaus Orchestra, and it's on the Teldec label. Now, it was recorded in 1994, and the Gewandhaus Orchestra, I don't really know much, if anything, about it. How embarrassing is that? But it's a good recording, and I think Vengerov's interpretation is a very good place to start because it's balanced. It's somewhere in between the extremes that I will talk about in the next few minutes. Listen to how the piece opens with this very, very, very quiet timpani sound, and notice too the general balance between the violin and the orchestra, because this is the balance that we're going to compare with the other recordings. Okay, let's get started. Well, we'll leave it there. That gives you a feel for how this wonderful work opens. Excuse me. Now, the very first notes for the violinist in any concerto, if you take the Beethoven Violin Concerto, it's quite a long way in. The violinist, poor guy, has to stand there, or lady, on the stage, on the podium with their head down, listening for quite a long time before their turn comes. But here, Bruch says, no, you're off from the very word go, just a timpani roll, and basically we're in. So let's just listen again to how Vengerov plays those very first notes. Listen to the bowing. Are those notes long? Are they even? How much vibrato is he using? How does he alter the dynamic in this recording? Because this is what we're going to be comparing with. Let's just have a little listen here. Okay. Isn't recording amazing? Because now we're going to bring onto the stage Arthur Grumiaux. And Arthur Grumiaux is a very famous Belgian violinist, right at the top in his time. And this is a recording that he recorded. He did two versions. He did one with Bernard Haitink in '62, and this is the one he's doing later in '73. It's also on Philips, and it's with the New Philharmonia Orchestra with Heinz Wahlberg. Let's listen to how the great Grumiaux handles that opening. Would it be rude to say it's a little bit more matter of fact than the Vengerov? It's the beginning of a concerto. It doesn't need to be over the top. It can just be, this is how it's going to be. At the end of the day, these are all great performances, and it's almost as if, excuse me, it's almost as if it doesn't matter. As long as the violinist and the orchestra are basically together and they're playing all the right notes at the right pitch, it's such a great piece of music that it's always going to take you. Let's listen to Itzhak Perlman, the great Itzhak Perlman, conducted by Bernhard Haitink with the Royal Concertgebouw Orchestra in 1984 on EMI. Listen out on this occasion for the length of his opening note, and listen to Perlman's phrasing. Remember too that every violinist who steps into the recording studio to record this piece has all the legacy of those who have gone before and the legacy of those to come. Legacy isn't the right word there, but you know what I mean. So there's a balance between them trying to find their own angle, trying to do something a bit different for the critics to talk about, but also to do what they want to do and play the music. Let's listen to the great Itzhak Perlman. Now, Wahlberg is taking the whole thing slower, and this is much more broadened out, isn't it? Marvellous, but we haven't finished yet. I'm going to bring you one more, and I'm going to let this one play through so you get a feel again of the beginning. And this is, to be honest, a violinist I didn't really know until I started my research for this talk. And I'd heard of her, of course. Her name is Sarah Chang. And what is interesting here, she's chosen Kurt Masur, the conductor that Vengerov used. And she's with the Dresda Philharmonie. And it's 2009, so it's 15 years later than the Vengerov. But listen to her bowing and phrasing, the confidence she has, and the way she's able to vary the use of vibrato from slow da to very fast. And listen to how she combines all the tricks in the book from the very, very first note. Wow, you're getting a feel where this great concerto, and we've just started, we've just begun. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring back Arthur Grumiaux, or should we say, how can I say, the master, the person who actually really, in modern recordings, I think put this on the map. Him as a older man recording this. Now I'm going to bring him back, and there's a lovely balance between the violin and the orchestra. It's not like the violin is saying, look at me the whole time. It really is a cohesive whole that I think makes sense. There's wonderful phrasing, and the sound quality is very good for the time it was recorded, in 73. So let's just have a listen. We'll just pick up from more or less where she left off. Now, the Philips recording engineers have done a fabulous job here. Did you notice those lovely bass notes from the double basses? And that really helps give a rhythm. And I think one of the reasons that this piece has become so popular and remains so popular is this fabulous sense of rhythm that you get all the way through the work, even in the slow movement, which is coming up soon. And if you notice closely, in Sarah Chang's recording, the bass notes were also very nicely, the double basses are very nicely articulated, and the timpani too. But in the third movement of her recording, it's less so, and I don't know why. I'm just wondering whether they recorded the third movement on another day or later, and the engineers had changed some settings. That I don't know, but I think it's a slight disappointment with the Chang recording in the third movement. It's not as pronounced as in the first and second. But to close the first movement, I'm going to bring Vengerov back on the podium, again with Kurt Masur and the Gewandhaus Orchester. And the movement doesn't end with a big bang. Most concertos, the end of the first movement, you get a whomp, 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 and then everybody adjusts in their seat and they get ready, and then they sit back and they have a little cough, and then this glorious second movement begins. That doesn't happen here. Listen to the ending. It just fades into one note very, very quietly, or depending who's doing it, but Vengerov does. And the second movement starts immediately. Obviously, we're going to have a little break in between here, but when you're at home and listen, you'll hear it will just glide into the next movement. Here we go, with Vengerov closing the first movement. You see? Something beautiful, something wonderful is going to happen. Max Bruch has set the stage for the greatest melody that he has ever written and needs to write. Will he disappoint? Not a bit of it. And to illustrate the opening of the second movement, I'm bringing onto the podium the great Julia Fischer. Here she is with David Zinman and the Tonhalle Orchestra from Zurich in a Decca recording. There's a lot of Decca recordings here, I don't know why, from 2013. Listen out for her really delicate vibrato. It's a slow vibrato. I don't think it's too much. It's very nice, especially bearing in mind it is the slow movement. And she has, notice too how she ends the phrases, sometimes with these very delicate whispers. Here we go. Well, there you go. I told you it was a great piece of music. I hope it didn't disappoint. A really beautifully balanced. And again, the Tonhalle Orchestra. What a wonderful performance. I was just reflecting back on my comment about the Chang and the bass and the engineers and the last movement. And maybe it's just the double basses are not playing as loud. Maybe the conductor, for whatever reason, has dropped them back. All sorts of variances when we listen to this beautiful music. Now we're going to bring another woman onto this podium, a very famous contemporary violinist, Janine Jansen, renowned for her phrasing, her interesting angle that she puts on her performances. And she's going to be conducted, or her conductor she's chosen to work with the Gewandhaus Orchestra is Riccardo Chili. And Riccardo Chili, I pronounce it Chili. It may be pronounced very differently in other places. I pronounce it that way because I know somebody who worked with him and she pronounces it that way, so forgive me if it's wrong. And this is the Gewandhaus Orchestra from Leipzig, again on Decca, 2006. I have to say I don't have any shares in Decca. I really want you to, again, notice her use of vibrato and use of dynamic crescendos to emphasize the emotions. And it's up to you to decide if she's overemphasizing or not. Okay. Again, that boom from the bass is very important to keep the thing structured and give it a sense of discipline and timing. Now there's something I want to talk about here, and it's something I've noticed recording violinists, that when they want to play with these really warm tones, they move the bow to a certain point away from the bridge and they give it quite a lot of energy. And it's interesting because every violin sounds different, but they nearly all have a tendency, if they're not careful, to overstretch that sound. And what happens is you get this very warm, and it's a very warm sound that you hear. But if it goes a little bit too hard, if the angle of the bow, if it's the violin, the way it's made, it can go very quickly go from wah to wah, sort of like a guttural kind of sound. And it's really hard for them to control. And I made a recording a while back where the violin had a tendency to do that. And it's a very, very expensive violin, a violin from more than €500,000, very old 18th century violin, but it had that tendency, and you could hear that a little bit happening in Janine Jansen's performance, and it will happen to a lesser extent with Perlman. And I don't know what violin he's playing, but it's probably a Strad, almost certainly a Strad. It's the nature of a violin, and the question is, do we allow that kind of tonality to come out? Or do we play the sort of André Rieu kind of thing where everything has to sound marshmallowy nice and beautiful. That's a question of taste, and I'm not anyone who's going to say one thing or the other. I'm just here to point out those sort of things that I hear listening to music and recording music. So here's Itzhak Perlman with the opening solo. Listen to his use of glissandi. This is the sliding up to a note or the sliding down to the note, and the way he controls that tone, that tendency to go from wah to out, to hold that back and just keep it under control with his long expressive notes. Have a listen. You know what, I could live with any of these recordings. It's such a great piece of music, isn't it? But I've got a real treat for you. I'm going to bring Sarah Chang back and, you know, have a listen, see what you think, all right? We're going to let her play for a little while. I hate to fade that out, but it's just phenomenal. The way that she brings those notes in, they're just like whispers. And she has that perfect control. For a violinist, that's like the pianist who's trying to play softly, and to get you don't hear the drag of the bow. It's just like, those notes just float, don't they, over and under and around the orchestra. Marvellous, marvellous stuff. Wow, okay, now, but we need someone to close. Well, no, we don't need someone to close. We're not there yet. we'll come back to Julia Fischer, and we'll give her the middle section to play. Have a little listen to this. We'll move her on a little bit more. Okay, that should do. Here we go. You see, isn't that wonderful? And Max Bruch, and I mentioned it before, has deployed a very clever trick here. He's gone for the key of E flat major, which allows Julia Fischer and the other violinists to bring this moment of joy into this very slow, sad and somber piece of music. By having a major key, you can get this beautifully warm, as I say, uplifting melody. Brilliant. Okay, but now we are going to bring Arthur Grumiaux back to the podium to finish off and close the second movement. And he can really bring this jollity, this sense of jollity into on the bass of sorrow so beautifully here. Here we go. Marvelous. Now, I can't emphasize enough the importance of hearing this piece of music in one go. Because although these excerpts are beautiful and we can compare, we need to switch all that off and we just need to let the music flow over us and take us on this journey downstream. Because that's what it's supposed to do, right? Now, for the third movement, we are going to bring back Maxime Vengerov with the Kurt Masseur and the Gewandhaus Orchestra. And here we are on the Teldec label. And this is a very fiery, bright and uplifting movement, as you would expect as the last movement of the piece. But again, you will see that Bruch doesn't just give us a single theme, he brings all these different elements together. But notice how Vengerov emphasizes the rhythmic nature of the movement and leading the way. When he comes in, you'll hear go tak, 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 and it's like he's driving the pace here. Okay. Now, there is something I need to warn you about, and it's something called intermodulation distortion. And it's important because when you hear the big orchestra come in on some of these pieces, maybe on your systems, even on headphones, you may hear some distortion in the loud sections. And this distortion can be caused by a number of things, but it's often formed in the microphones themselves. Because when you have a loud symphony orchestra with lots of different frequencies and tones all happening together, crashing together, you get what we call this intermodulation distortion. You can have it on an electronic basis, but it actually happens in the microphones, in your loudspeakers as well. Now, some systems are better at hiding this than others, and that may be then a good thing. Like if you listen on your kitchen radio, you may not be aware of it because there's not enough detail to bring it across. On a pair of speakers like this, you will hear every ounce of it for sure. It's not too bad, but I'm just warning you, and even if you're listening on a very, very expensive pair of headphones or really expensive studio monitors, you will still hear that when it's there in the recording. And there is a little bit of it in this recording and some of the others too. Don't let it put you off. This is the nature and the limits of our technology. And if you want to hear it perfectly, go to a live recording. Then you will not experience it. Okay, right. So let's bring Maxime Vengerov onto the stage to open up for us this very, very exciting third movement. Now, the dynamic range in this recording is really attractive. It's still not anywhere near as what it would be if you were live in the front row of the concert hall, but this is an area where, to be honest, CDs and streaming really will shine over vinyl, because if you want a very open, dynamic recording and the big blast of the orchestras versus the quieter moments, then you need that full dynamic range. With vinyl, sometimes you get a bit of bleed through coming in. Not always, but you can. Now, you're not going to hear this full dynamic range that I'm hearing in this room because, very simply, obviously, YouTube will compress to make everything sound more even and balanced all the way through. You'll also notice that I'm adjusting the volume quite a lot here. That's because I don't want to, I'm not going to overload the in-room microphones, but again, because of the compression and everything, it's best if I just try and feed a constant volume through. But there is a small thing to notice here with the Vengerov thing. At a certain point, when he comes in very loud, but it seems to get quieter and quieter and quieter. I don't know whether that's him and the orchestra getting quieter, or whether it's the engineers just pulling back a little bit because they know that the next crescendo coming in is really, really loud. That I don't know, but you saw me compensating very slightly for that for the benefit of this YouTube recording. So now, no surprises here. I'm bringing Sarah Chang on. Now, you could argue that she was too soft, she was too fairy-like, too fluffy. Not fluffy, because she was very precise. In the second movement, anything but here. You listen out to here, she's absolutely on fire. it's also a very, very nice and clean recording. Have a go at this. Isn't that? Oh, yeah. Sorry about that. I just find that absolutely marvelous. It's her control. Her control is incredible. Okay, now we're bringing on a violinist we haven't yet heard up until now, and a very, very famous violinist from the 70s. And this is Grumiaux. And she's going to perform the piece with Rudolf Kemp, with a Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, again recorded on Decca. We're going to listen to the opening, and I'm putting it in for a very important reason. I want to show contrasts. And here, Kemp has a really lovely strings opening, very, very subtle. And there's no real emphasis on this big dramatic rhythm that's about to come. But then we have these horns. Now, it's written in the score. If I can dig up a copy, I'll show you on the screen. That in between the da, 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 you've got horns. And a bassoon, if I remember correctly. But in this recording, the horn, or horn, is really obvious. Now, later in the movement, the horns and the flutes come in and take that role, but they do it very obscenically, really deliberately. And that works. But here, I think this lonely horn, or whatever it is, the timing for me is not quite right. And it's too much, because in the score, it marked piano. So it should just be a hint. And I find it spoils Chung's ability to really dance with the music. But you decide. I mean, Kemp is a great, great conductor. So who am I to say? I'm just pointing out what I notice. It's lovely. Soft. Beautiful opening. Maybe it doesn't disturb you at all. Maybe I listen too much. Maybe I'm too critical. Listen to it again and decide for yourself. Now, okay. So, now, number 17. We're back with Julia Fischer and David Zinman and the Tonhalle Orchestra, because they're doing a great job here. I really like you to focus on her sense of timing. Bum, ba, bum, bum, ba, bum. But also see how it's working here with the orchestra. You might think it's too much in the beginning. Da, 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 da. I'll show you. I'll point it out as we go in. All the others up until now have played it right down, especially Kemp. But here, for whatever reason, David Zinman says, okay, it's written in the score. I'm going to bring those notes to the front, and it will give you a very, very different opening section. Listen carefully. Isn't that marvellous? She's got a really great sense of timing and rhythm there. Was that too much at the beginning? Ba-ba, ba-ba. You to decide. It's another way of interpreting it, but the sense of rhythm and the energy here and her playing is just superb, isn't it? I mean, it's world class like all of them are. And talking about world class, I'm going to bring Grumiaux Chung back to the podium, but this time with Klaus Tannstedt and the London Philharmonic, because I think this is a really, really interesting combination. This is recorded 15 years after her previous recording with Rudolf Kemp. She's recording this in Abbey Road Studios in London. And there's a lovely balance here between the violin and orchestra, wonderful playing, and I can see exactly why she re-recorded it. The sound quality is also good, and she's, you know, more mature. 15 years in a soloist's life, 15 years, she now knows what she wants. Maybe she has more say in how she wants it. Maybe there's a better relationship between what she wants to do and what Tannstedt wants to do. I don't know, but this is the result is a very, very beautiful version of the piece. Marvelous control over the orchestra. just fabulous. So sadly, this is coming to the end of this recording, this video, this talk, because we're getting to the end of the work. And who am I going to choose to end this marvelous piece of music, this genius piece of music? The fact that Bruch can write so well for the lower register of the violin, and these violinists have made that sound so beautiful. Jung was amazing there, wasn't she? The warm sound. Sometimes it can sound very boxy and woody, and the bow can scrape, and here it's just marvelous. And well, no guesses, no prizes for guessing. I'm going to bring Sarah Chang back. She's my discovery in this research, and with Kurt Masur and the Dresden Philharmonie, of course, 2009 Warner Classics, the Parlophone label. Let's have her close it up for us. Oh God, can you imagine being in the hall there, hearing that and watching that great young violinist, or any of our violinists today? Listen, if you have been, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Enjoy the music.